hang on.
Yeah,
Kathy, we're ready to start.
Awesome, we're rolling.
Cool, we're good.
And for call to order.
All right, good evening, everyone. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the Town of Barnstable's Government Access Channel in accordance with Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 20. The chair must inquire whether anyone else is recording this meeting, and if so, to please make their presence known. Is anyone else recording this meeting? Lovely. Roll call. Scott Horsley.
Here.
Brian Hughes. Tom Cambereri. Councillor Clark.
here.
Z. Crocker.
Present.
Paul Neary. Rob O'Leary.
Yeah.
Louis O'Neill.
Here.
Butch Roberts.
Here.
Glenn Snell.
Here.
Councillor Starr. All right, we do have 7 present and a quorum.
Excellent. Has anybody had a chance to look at the minutes and want to make a motion?
I move to accept the minutes as presented.
Second. Second, great. Roll call.
We actually don't need a roll call because we have nobody hybrid, so we can.
Oh,
I'll do a roll call if you want me to.
No, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Okay, next meeting date. Let's get that out of the way.
Meeting date. So, if we were to go from a month from today, that would be Tuesday, July 15th.
There he is. Gordon's here.
Oh.
There he is. Hey, Gordon.
Hey!
Hey.
Oh,
Just mark it down. Excellent. All right, so if we were to go from a month-ish from today, Tuesday, July 15th, Selectmen's is free at 6, along with Channel 18 is available. If you want to go before, after, I've got all the dates that you could want. And July 15th is a Tuesday.
You got a problem with that? Sounds like logical we stay on the same schedule unless anybody, 6 o'clock again.
Yep, 6 p.m.
Okay. Very good.
15th, 1-5.
Good deal. All right, so
Tuesday, yeah.
maybe we got some real important stuff to talk about tonight. We're turning the corner. We're pretty well educated now. We're gonna start talking about some recommendations. Rob and his team has spent some time and put together some good talking points for us. Rob, I was just wondering if you could just refresh my memory on schedule here. When are we supposed to present to the town council again?
So the conversations I've been having with downtown have been that sometime in September, we would come in front of council.
September.
So then we need to be wrapped up obviously prior to that and have a conversation about how that gets presented, et cetera. The other thing we have to make sure we touch point on is that whether it be today, tomorrow, whenever we decide on whatever this is, we did promise Tom Lee and Tom McKean that would bring them back in to have a conversation with them about it as well. So there's some meeting in there that is, once the committee has decided what it wants to do, we need to circle back with the health division / chair of the Board of Health to have a conversation with them too, because we did promise that back in February whenever we did that.
Okay, I think that's a good idea, given the discussion we're gonna probably have tonight.
I had a conversation with Tom McKean this afternoon. They were already reading it.
Good. Well, that says, I want to know that because that means we got tonight, we got July, we got August, 2 more meetings, and then we're there. So that's why tonight is we're in steps.
Unless you want to double, I mean, there's nothing that doctrinally
Well,
says.
we would like to meet at least 6 times in August, I'm sure.
That's your guys' call.
You're the chair.
Good luck getting a quorum from your members on that, and then let me know how that works out for you.
I hear you. We could do that, but obviously I'd like to try to schedule it so that we can get it done in the regularly scheduled. I'm sure people have a lot of plans in the summer. So let's see if we can stay on track here. If we can't, we can't, right? But we'll try. So thanks for that schedule. I guess we'll start with the update on the watershed permit, Rob.
I mean, I can start if you
Why
want.
don't you start?
So for those of you who don't know, back in July of 2023, Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, Mass DEP, put out not just amendments to the Title V nitrogen sensitive area regulations, but also put out the new watershed permit regulations. So in an effort to address those new regulations and provide our community with really the best foot forward as we implement our CWP, we went ahead and applied for a watershed permit on September 1st of 2023, so just barely 2 months after the regulations went into effect. And over the last almost 2 years now, we've made our way through administrative review and technical review, and our draft permit is now available for public comment. All public comments need to go to Mass DEP. There's a water resources analyst essentially who's established and sort of the lead on this particular effort. That's Maggie. All of her contact information is available, but this is really a huge milestone for us. So public comment's going to be accepted until August 11th. And we followed all of the normal cadence for public notice. We have the notice translated in Spanish as well as Portuguese, and it's available on Barnstable Water Resources. And I believe Chris sent some of that contact information and general just notice information around to the group. You want to add anything, Rob?
No, I mean, really our role at this point is purely just facilitating the public outreach part of that. DEP maintains control of and the managing of the actual comments themselves and things of that nature.
Okay, I was on the phone with Maggie last week. I think Barnstable's gonna be number 2 then, is that right?
We would be number 2. We would be the first under the new regulations.
Right, yeah, I think we're number
Pleasant
1.
Bay Alliance is the first true watershed permit, but that was developed as part of the pilot program.
Yep.
So our permit would be marked number 2, but we would be the first in the Commonwealth under the new
that's great.
regulations.
So one thought I had, and I'm not gonna suggest this right now, but I wanted to put it out there as a possibility, is having Maggie come to one of our meetings. Or somebody from DEP, because they've been really helpful. I'm working with them on other towns, and they've been at the table, and they've been really helpful. So I'm not recommending that, but maybe after tonight or next week, if we feel like we'd like to have them here, I'm thinking we could probably get them here.
Honestly though, I don't know what they'd be allowed, since you're in the public review period, I don't know what they'd be allowed to. I don't know what to ask them.
Informational.
What they'd be allowed to say or not say.
I think to your point, we'd have to ask them. I know that part of the public notice is you can request a public hearing, and that may be something that would be more formal. That may be something that they can participate in. I don't know what the regulations are behind what they can participate in and what they can't. That would certainly be a question for Maggie.
If you're gonna do a public hearing, it makes sense to do it here.
Right.
Okay, well, we can circle back to that. It was just a thought that I had that I wanted to put out there for people to consider. Yes?
So the watershed permit is for 20 years?
So what they've done is they've taken a 20-year, they've acknowledged our CWP is 30 years.
Yep.
Their permits are written for 20 years, and so what they've done is they've picked a nitrogen prediction of where we'll be at 20 years and used that for the permit limits. So
80% is that?
yeah, it's about 81%.
And the regs require at least 75%.
Right, so we're above that.
We were already above that.
So
And does it specify where the effluent is going?
no, it's not, the permit's moved on that.
Permit's moot on that?
Right, permit basically says, we're going to the CWMP, you need to remove this much nitrogen by this period of time, and there's 5 tables in there, or 6 tables in there by watershed that show on each watershed. It does in some of those tables, well, all of them show a 30-year limit as well as the 20, but for many of them, it's the same because you've achieved already what you need to achieve in the watershed by the 20-year period.
So Rob, on the discharge, you'll need an updated groundwater discharge permit then, is that right?
So we have the groundwater discharge permit we have now, and we're working with DEP on where the next steps are on that.
Okay. All right, so my suggestion is we should all try to look at that draft watershed permit. It's posted and available currently as a draft?
Yes.
It is now on, if you go to the environmental monitor, or actually in the email that I sent you, that is the official draft notice that was attached. In there, there's 2 links to the EEA app. If you just search for Barnstable, it'll come up. There's quite a few under Barnstable, but Barnstable Watershed Permit. And that has all the documentation you could need.
Would it be reasonable and easy to ask maybe you to download it and distribute it to us just in case people have trouble accessing it, or?
So DEP has been hesitant, we talked about that early. Now, maybe they've changed by now, but early on, They did not want us distributing the actual permit itself.
Yeah, they've only had us submit, or I should say distribute the public notice. So the public notice tells you where to find it. Although I will say it does take a couple clicks, so some people may get frustrated with that process, but it is available.
And we know that it can be, has somebody gone there to look at it?
Yep, and it's not just the draft permit, but they actually have all the back and forth documentation from the technical review process as well. So you can see the conversations back and forth and the responses.
So there's a public notice
Yes.
for comment, but they don't want you to see the comment.
They didn't want us sharing the permit. My only thing I could think of is that if we by mistake released an earlier draft or something like that, they control the final version of it. And so they want to make sure people are, this is my guess, that they want to make sure people are going to that final version of it, not some previous draft or something like that got released.
Okay, I get that, but you can't ask for public comment and then hide the document.
No, they're not hiding it.
They're not
It's
hiding it, it's available, you just have to follow their process of
They want you
accessing
coming
it.
to their website to get it.
I just followed it, and what I'm seeing is I could download the notice of the watershed permit, but not the watershed permit.
So,
And then, once
maybe
you,
what we can do is just
I will
provide
send out instructions for getting to it, cause
or send the direct link to the page as opposed to
no.
their,
there's no, the way that the app is set up.
oh yeah,
it
you're right,
can't be.
you're right.
Yeah, I'll send out instructions tomorrow.
Just send it out,
Chris,
take responsibility for it.
Chris, I found it.
They were pretty clear about not
You
wanting
sent
to
me
do
a link.
that.
Approximately how many
Oh,
pages?
we'll,
Is it?
18.
Okay.
18.
I would just
we'll
make
touch
deal
base
with it.
tomorrow.
yeah,
We'll talk about it tomorrow, we'll figure something
I
out.
just think people might wanna see the back and forth documentation too, which you have to go to the project page for that.
Well, I'm just thinking about the timing here, where this thing's gonna move fast, and I wanna make sure everybody can access it, and sometimes, there's a couple instances where government websites are hard to navigate.
Oh, I'm aware.
Happens once in a while, so I'm trying to make it as easy for this group as possible, so if the decision is.
public.
And the public, if we can't, I mean, I'm almost, it'd be great to post it on the town website, but if DEP says that's not appropriate, then that's
They
not
were pretty,
appropriate.
you were definitely clear about that,
Okay, and not to do that,
to not post it.
okay?
I had a question about DEP originally sent back a list of questions when they got the permit. Those questions I couldn't find.
Yeah, so that is on the project page that they have the back and forth questions and responses.
But it doesn't use the word questions, and there are like 15 back
Can you
and
go
forths.
to it,
Yeah,
can you
can you
just
just
show
do it?
people?
I'm sure you've answered them all, but I just couldn't find the list.
We did.
I'm sure.
I think it
I
might
don't
be
wanna take
easier.
too much time on this, but why don't I suggest that if people have trouble, call Chris, is that okay, Chris?
Yep.
Okay.
I
He's gonna go
will,
right now.
tomorrow, I will send out a nice instruction of how to find it.
But I would
Thank you.
like to suggest that this is sort of strongly recommended homework, people to look at.
I have a question and a comment. I've actually read the draft permit. And I guess one of the things I wonder about is the role that we hope to play within this committee. And we've got the DEP regulation and the watershed permit, which to me is one part of the equation. But then we have our other local regulator, which is the Board of Health. And so are we trying to align all this? I mean, I look at the watershed permit, which to me does not actually answer a lot of the questions, notwithstanding the fact that we have a good plan based on the permit, based on 30 years of soaring and being able to remove what we need to remove, more than that. But it doesn't really speak to a lot of the things we've been working on in this room in terms of alternatives and how and why they're important. I know it's an adaptive plan, I get that. I'm not missing that point. But against what we're charged with in this committee, how are we to think about that? In other words, the presentation to the town council should say what? The draft permit is good and it's a nice start, but maybe it doesn't go far enough and we need to do other things within the community to make sure that the community has clean water going forward. I guess that's something I wanted to at least spend a few minutes on.
And actually, that raises another question in my mind, maybe you already said it, when is the permit expected to get issued? How much time would we have to comment on it?
We have until August 11th to submit, well, folks have until August 11th
August?
to submit comment, but there's no timeline that we've been given as to how long any review or response will take before a permit is issued.
So the comments are
So
supposed to be
the comment
there.
period ends on August 11th. All comments have to be submitted to DEP
So
by then.
to your point, Z, there's a couple other things that are floating out there too. So the CWMP itself requires a 5-year update, of which one happens to be due this year, which is what you guys are working on. If you read the permit's requiring going forward 5-year updates as well. They happen to, as long as they award the permit in 2025, align. So that those 5-year updates will be, I'm hoping, one and the same going forward. But being permit number 2, my guess is some of this stuff still needs to get ironed out as we go forward in the conversation. So my expectation is that this committee will come up with whatever recommendations we come up with in terms of what we want to do regarding IAs. That will go to town council. That will get incorporated, assuming approved, into the 5-year update that we're going to publish in December to the CWMP, which then starts the discussion about, has the CWMP materially changed, or is this just a notification of stuff? That then, as I understand the permit, which is based on the CWMP, becomes the base document for the CWMP. So I think that's how it all works, but that's my conjecture. As we move through this, that's how, well, that's gonna get, I'm betting, more ironed out, because they've not done 20 of these. They've done one.
Along those lines, Barnstable is proposing the area, the scope of the CWP is the same as the watershed permit.
Correct.
I believe in other towns, Falmouth, Wellfleet, and Tisbury, that I'm pretty familiar with, there's a CWMP for the town, but then there are watershed permits for the watersheds.
Right.
Which take into account other towns.
Yeah, we had asked from the beginning to be able to do, instead of doing 5 or 6 individual permits, to do one permit for the entire town, because that's what our CWMP encompassed, and they agreed with us that that was probably the most sensible way to go.
So why don't we put an agenda item for the next meeting, just to revisit this, and hopefully people have had a chance to look at it, especially if the deadline is August 11th, one of the deadlines. We should have a little bite at it at the next
Yep.
meeting.
Do you want to, quickly, since you're on this page, Chris, do you want to run this through this real
Yeah,
quick?
I would show them those attachments at the bottom of the.
Yeah, so this is through the EEA E-Place, which is where, DEP put all of the documents. These are all, they will download. Obviously, that's our last, actually, no, that's FY '22 annual report.
Those look like all things that you submitted. I don't see.
Right, these are all the things that were
But
submitted.
then at the bottom is the, different
Uh,
responses back and forth.
Fourth from the bottom.
Yeah. What's that?
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, this is it, I believe.
Well, that was dated 23 though. What was, go up to the
I tried to
top.
read it today.
No, that's the date of
That's the date
application.
the application went in.
Date that we applied for it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the watershed permit.
Should be 18 pages,
Yeah.
something like that.
18, yes.
Okay.
And then all the supporting documentation.
And I think, to me, the heart of it that we probably do want to dig into is how does it align with some of the areas we looked at designating for 500, 1,000, 2,000, et cetera,
So-
and how does it?
So the way I've thought of
They have
that,
math in there.
and then we're kind of getting into the next conversation with this, but the way I've thought of that is that if we're doing that as an and, not an or,
Right.
we've already regulatorily satisfied the permit. So this is the town deciding it wants to do more on top of that. Now, as you talked about, there's a list in there about how to do adaptive management. The permit acknowledges that the plan has adaptive management written into it. So my expectation is it will go down that hole. The big question is, because it's an addition to and not dealing with the system that's actually going into it, does it require a notice of project change or not? I think that conversation will end up happening. But all of this, as long as it's an and, I can't see there being problematic because the permit's already been satisfied, if you know what I'm saying.
I do, although we're looking to the future, so I mean, part of what they illustrate there is the cost of doing all this, which we all know may be problematic over time. I know that we're doing okay so far, I get that. So I understand the and, but I also think that there needs to be, incentives to the and or something, whether it's regulatory incentives or, carrot incentives.
And we'll talk about some of that in here too,
Right.
but I don't know that necessarily changes the permit status in terms, so as an example, if the town had a carrot incentive, to use your term, I don't think that necessarily does anything one way or the other to the permit. If the town elected to decide to do, so if the town, so one of the things Chris and I batted back and forth a lot this past month was the golden, the ideal would be to have a way to say, hey homeowner, you're now in a mandated area, you need to do an IA versus a Title V when your Title V dies, but the cost to you will be the same as what you would have paid had you put in a Title V. And find a way to mitigate the difference between the two. And we went back to your slides where you're talking about the tax exempt piece, and you have to be above a certain income level for that to really be effective.
Yeah.
So really, it's a smaller subset of those people that we need to sort of look at. So my point to all of this, going back to your question, is that if the town were to say, we found a way to crack that nut and figure that out, I don't necessarily know that that's derogatory or in any way, shape, or form competitive to the permit. The permit's dealing with already been dealt with in many ways. Do you guys agree, or am I off in left field on that?
No, I agree. I mean, the permit identifies that we need to remove X amount of nitrogen by traditional solutions, and any material change to the plan would have to go through a modification process, which they outline in here. So if we were doing, say, IAs in lieu of sewers, that would be deemed a modification.
Right.
As I interpret this, doing it on top of it would not be, but we would certainly need the department to weigh in on that. They have a major and a minor modification provision. One's more paperwork, basically.
Before we get into your question, you look like you're uncomfortable.
We are, but within the permit as it's drafted currently, it basically says if there's a permit anywhere else in town, you can go ahead and put in Title V systems. That's basically what the permit says.
It allows
I
the town to
understand,
do
I
that, but
understand.
doesn't necessarily mean the town will allow that to
And
happen.
that's my point.
Right,
Is
yeah.
that we need, in my view, we need to figure out how to address that. And maybe that's through the Board of Health and another regulatory
Right.
stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, and that's
my only, that's my.
because the updated Title V
Right,
regs state
I
that, so they would
get
have to be
it,
done
but-
locally.
Yeah, no, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay, so let's,
We can get into that.
I think let's move, we need to move on just because we have a big item here, which is related, they're very related. Again, if we can put this on the agenda for next month, Chris, and then people, please look at the permit. If you have questions, comments, we'll discuss that at the next meeting, all right? So, I wanna thank Rob and crew again for putting these talking points together. This is a great start, and appreciate you doing it, otherwise I was gonna have to do it, and I think you did as good or better job, so thanks.
Can I make a quick statement on this before we begin?
Yeah, please.
None of this came down on stone tablets. This was just, the 10 years there's nothing, we tried to reflect what we heard you guys say last meeting. And then the parts that we weren't sure of, like the 10-year part that we put in here,
For discussion.
that's all for discussion. None of this is coming in as, this is what you have to do.
So Rob, how do you think we should go through this? I've got some questions and comments, but do you wanna walk us through it step by step, or?
Okay. Would you rather do it that, and I can go through bullet by bullet, and then
Why
we can do
don't
each
why
one?
don't you summarize each bullet really, we don't, obviously you don't need to read it to us, but tell us your rationale, and then we can talk, maybe take it
So-
bullet by bullet.
Sure. Okay, so the first one was trying to, based on what we heard from conversations last time with the committee, was they were trying to come up with a distance from water body. And that was the discussion. What we heard coming out of the end of that was that 500 feet was the one that the committee seemed to be landing on at that time. We then, as we started to write that, realized that it wasn't just 500 feet to the water body, it's also 500 feet to another body that might contribute to the water body. Basically, the Marston's Mills River is what really drove that conversation as we started doing that. So we put that in, and then we said, okay, what about if a sewer's coming? What about if? What about if? What about if? And we tried to sort of address at least the obvious to us at the time, what about ifs with the sub-bullets, and do that. So not reading it to you, that's what's there. One of the things Chris was really careful with, and you tried to use doctrinal language, and that's why you see those footnotes at the bottom of the page, so that we all have the same definition of what something is, and not, Kelly thinks it's one thing and I think it's another thing, and Z thinks it's yet another thing. So that's what that is. So that is that first bullet. It's open to discussion.
So I just want to clarify a question. Second word is all properties. So the way I'm envisioning this would work as it's written here is, if you have a property where the corner of the property is 500 feet, but the septic system is 600 feet away, it's still in, according to this, correct?
I actually thought about that.
That's
one I hadn't thought about.
Yeah, I believe in the map that you made up, Amber, that if in your case, the 500 happened to
If it intersects the
go
property
a
anyway.
foot onto it, it does count that.
So any
Whether the
property-
septic system is, to your point, 600 feet away.
And the other, by the way, Wellfleet's doing the exact same thing. They're doing also edge of properties, the same. But the other thing that came up in Wellfleet is, where's the line? It's a GIS line. Can that be contested?
Well,
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
Will that's been the argument the whole time.
so someone who lives on the coastline owns down to mean low water in the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
So that would be their property boundary, and if our GIS is correct, it's 500 feet from that. So we based it off of like where,
Wait, 500 feet is measured from mean low water?
well, it's measured from wherever the parcel line is in GIS.
This may be
That's
something
at
we
the
need
edge
to
of water.
focus on, because I was assuming it was
Yeah,
like the water line. Yeah.
Yeah, it's based on whatever GIS has defined the property line as, which is not gonna be to mean low water
Probably need a-
accurately.
Probably need a provision, like here's the official, like an overlay map, but if you wanna contest it, you can go out in the field with your surveyor and,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because some people are gonna contest it, so that has to be relieved. But that was my first question, so it's intended to be, just so everybody's aware, if a little part of your property is in, then you're in, and you're triggered by all of these.
That's the way it's written.
Yeah, that's fine, I just wanna be clear
Yeah.
what it says, that's all.
Or you could, I guess, change it to all septic systems.
If you change it to septics, then you need to know where all the septics are,
Yeah.
which I don't think we do.
I suppose a definition needs to be drawn up of what the, boundary at the water is.
Scott, this isn't about what we want.
I understand.
What do you want?
No, I understand. All I'm saying is, what does this say?
Wait a minute,
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a little vague.
It is vague, so
Yeah,
that's.
so it's
that's
up
my-
to you to try to define it.
Correct, I understand. I just want to make people aware that that's what it says, I think, and you're right, there's some, I think it's okay for now. I mean,
Can I ask?
yeah, please, Rob.
I'm just curious, how many properties would be impacted by that particular sentence?
Yeah, we had that in the
We have-
last.
we have that right
table.
here.
I already have it.
It's a table attached.
You got a page.
We don't have.
Oh, yeah, I have the table attached.
Table's
Is it
attached.
page 4?
Page
Or
4.
you put the table in.
Yep,
Yeah, I did that.
918 non-CWMP properties.
Oh, yeah.
Is that for a single watershed?
That
Is this
was.
different than the numbers on that slide?
But it just gives.
Oh, that might only be 3 bays.
Yeah, so.
My apologies. All right, so that's only for the 3 bays, the one that I put in there.
Right, rather than the-
Yeah, so for Centerville, 3 bays, and Shoestring Bay, within 500 feet, there's a total of 1,892 parcels. 1,062 of those are CWMP, and then 473 are non-CWMP, and 357 don't have a septic system in them.
I mean, I kind of like the parcel thing, because you can produce a map like this, it's pretty clear, and people
Yeah.
know whether they're in or out, right? I mean, it's kind of
I agree.
pretty straightforward.
Otherwise you're gonna.
So non-CDO
Defensible.
means they're never gonna get sued. Correct.
It's not planned right now.
They're not
Not
anticipating
identified.
to receive it at this time.
so Scott, just one suggestion about what you were asking about people appealing the distance setback. I mean,
Yeah.
you could really set this up like a zoning boundary where it's a boundary that's shown on a map and it is what it is. It's not,
Right.
it's based on 500 feet, but this is the line and the line is what it is.
But this would probably get incorporated into like a health regulation, right? In health regulations, there can always be variances and
Right.
appeals, so you just want
Yeah.
some process identified, which I think was pretty easy to do, but, okay, good. My next question was on the second hollow bullet. Best available technology is your terminology, and you reference it to Barnstable Health Division or DPW. My question is, why not just use the state BART list?
We
probably talked about
We
that.
went back and forth on that a bit, because the BART list at this point in time, as we looked at it, had some 19s on it. And the town may not want that to be, they may not, so basically, what our fear was, if the state list had systems on it that the town wasn't interested in utilizing, but it's still on the state list, then person X could come in and go, it's on the state list,
Yeah.
I get to use it.
Yeah.
You know, so we wanted there to be more control at the local level to say, and I don't know if that's a sub-board that meets every 2 years to say, these are the best available technologies for the next 2 years, or how that gets delineated, but at least that way the community has got control over, these are the systems that we consider appropriate. So, as I said, we went back and forth on that a little bit.
Yeah.
And that's the reason we ended up where we did.
I think that's an important distinction, and part of what I think that may be thought about is the 10-year pass might be different depending on what system that you have. So if you have a 19, maybe you get a 5-year pass. Maybe if you have something that's 10 or less, you get 10 years. There's
That's another way of doing
some
it.
formula
Yeah.
like that. I don't know if that's the way I might think about it.
Again, we were just trying to get stuff back in front of you that you guys could react to and have these conversations. The last sub-bullet in number 1,
Yep.
you wanna talk about that?
That's all of the islands, everybody there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Practically.
So basically what ended up happening is when you did the 500s, there was
Yeah.
sort of like a sliver in the middle of the island, and it seemed silly that you might as well just do everybody at that point. But that's purely just,
Yeah.
we were just looking at maps, and that may not be what you politically wanna do. Everyone keeps looking at Z.
Yeah, right.
Depends if you think it's arbitrary.
No, the whole, I mean, to some extent, I think you're open to the argument of arbitrary on all of it.
All of it, for sure.
You know, so,
There's plenty, I agree, but there are plenty of regulations that have numbers, 100 feet from wetlands,
agreed, arbitrary.
50 feet to Title V. No science there.
So, but that's why we put that last sub-bullet, is because there was that strip through the middle, it's why leave
I think
this?
it's okay.
So 500 feet with a foot per day per groundwater, you're talking about septic systems within 1.4 years of travel time.
That's, nice thing about that is we'll see some benefits, right?
Yeah, well, the question is, do you want more? In
More
the
and
first
better.
5 years.
Yeah.
And
So that's a question, that's a good question. Do we need more than, should we do more than 500 feet? You've got, Amber's given us the numbers for all these different zones. What do we got here,
Give me a second.
500, 1,000, 15, yeah.
So let's just don't do a tutorial here. This is 500 feet, that's the
Be
pink.
careful, if you touch it, it messes up the screen if you
Okay,
touch it.
that's the pink, and there's a total of 1,800 for all this?
Yes.
Or that?
Yes,
This
All of it.
this sheet is all of it.
All right.
Including something you
So
can't see
all-
down on the left-hand part of the screen.
Yeah.
And of those are in the CWMP.
Right.
Correct.
To be sewer at some point within 20 to 30 years.
Right.
And then this is non-CWMP, so that's what we'd be grabbing pretty much down here, things that were left out because of the MEP. No septics. And then phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. But these are within this.
Within the
Within that.
CWP.
Yes.
1062.
So in phase 1, yeah,
Yep.
these add
that is
up to that.
property.
So-
And then this is
Basically
1,000
identified
feet,
as
which
open
is
space. It could be open space.
yellow.
It could also be
Right.
And it
property
would be,
access.
yeah, and it would be additive.
No. It's anything
There's
not
orange,
developed,
then there's
but
Not
it could also be
yeah.
something with open space.
Okay, so it could be.
Pink, orange,
developable,
yellow,
but not-
green. Pink,
So-
yellow, orange,
Right
green.
here.
So Tom, what's the time of travel for the,
Well, it's 1,000 feet, it's
So time
1,000
of travel
it's like
is
3
on-
years,
I've
3 years,
not.
3 years.
On a
3
new
years.
slide.
Oh,
So you
Thanks,
had,
Amber.
you had asked
I
for
didn't know
the,
the ad.
you asked for the sub-watershed lines, so the sub-watershed lines are in blue or dashed blue on this figure. And the time of travel is only within the setback areas you guys were interested in looking at. So pink or red is the less than 10-year travel time, and the blue is the greater than 10-year travel time. There is one caveat that needs to be noted here, which is way up in the upper Marston's Mills River. This area, it's a 10-year travel time to the nearest water body, and that might mean these wetlands in
That's the
here.
cranberry bog, right?
Yeah, so these could actually be greater than 10 years because it's based on 10 years to the next water body, not necessarily the estuary. But again, we broke the data down based on all parcels with a less than 10 year or greater than 10 year, and then CWMP parcels, non-CWMP, and the no septic parcels.
So what happened with Great Island? Is it the geography, geology?
So it tends to be that when you're close to the sub-watershed divides, these darker blue lines, sorry. So the dashed blue lines that run through here, whenever you're close to one, the travel time goes up. Like it, and that, maybe Tom can explain that better than I
Yeah,
can.
so close to here, you've got like a nice linear flow from the aquifer. It's really close. Now, if you went up near the moraine, that water dives down and then goes linear and then comes back up, and you got like a couple, a century or more travel time. So the same kind of thing happens here. It's like this is horizontal flow out to the embayments, and then inside you've got vertical flow down before it comes back up. So this is a little bit, so that's why the travel time is greater there. So these are increments of setback.
Yeah, that's still
5.
500-foot increments.
Okay.
And if you're looking at either all parcels or non-CWMP parcels, they're broken out into greater than or less than 10-year travel times.
So that's like 4, so that's like 2,000 feet.
2,000, yep.
Yep.
Does that just happen to be like that, or is that a time of travel line?
The black line is our CWMP phasing. It can be confusing because
You asked for a lot of things to get overlaid.
that polygon.
And the 10-year time of travel line then is not this one.
No, that's 2,000.
It is.
It's the difference between pink and blue.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So that blue is greater than 10 years, and everything in pink is less than 10 years.
Okay.
So we talked a little bit about, how do we pick a number? How do we pick a number based upon science? And Amber spent a lot of time, and we talked about it. I don't think there's any hard, fast rule that should be 500 or 1,000. I think it becomes a policy decision. I think the biggest thing is time of travel. And if we want this to happen sooner than later, then these systems along the shoreline are the ones to go after. I think that's scientifically solid. And 1 to 2 or 3 year travel time seems like we have a 30-year plan. If we can get results in 3 years, to me that's pretty interesting.
The other thing too to think about, we thought about a little bit as we were doing this, and again, this is your decision, not ours, in terms of this, but so we're gonna do a 5-year update every 5 years.
Yeah.
So if you start with 500 feet now, see how that unfurls and unrolls. In the future, you could potentially, if you decided that was something that was positive and wanted to expand it, you would have the potential to expand it in the next 5-year update. Assuming by the way, all this assumes town council approval. I mean, we're not trying to foresay that. So it's sort of another way of looking at that potentially.
Yes, Chris?
If, in your analysis, when you said there's a tiny strip on Grand Island, if you took the distance and changed it from 500 to 600 or 700, would that eliminate that strip?
At some point, I don't know what that number is.
Because then I'm thinking then it's,
Again, on page 4, you have the Little Island / Grand Island setbacks. That follows the same exact methodology as what Amber put in. So if you go to 1,000, you add 52 more parcels, so you're at one.
I was just looking to close that little strip so that it could be evenly applied throughout the town.
Yeah,
without
even
making
at
this
2,000 feet, there are actually still some parcels there.
I just, I was just wondering if
Yeah.
it was
In the very
close.
middle.
Right in the middle, yeah.
Right in the very middle, right, it's 5
Trying to
parcels.
zoom in.
Oh, I see.
Here,
I mean, that island,
Griffin, can you
it's a
move to the right
confusing
or the
thing
left?
based on what Tom was saying, though, that's always,
Roll up at that
I
side.
found.
Yeah, I know, I tried.
You brought it up too.
Hang on, hang
Now I bogged it down.
Nice job, Griff.
Blown its
I'm gonna
mind.
sit back down.
Thanks, Griffin.
He goes unpunished, right?
Yeah, it's time to travel and being illustrated.
All the people online right now are watching this and throwing out for motion sickness.
I animated it.
Okay, well, good to know. The point is, broadly, yes, there is a number where that all gets folded in. We just said, all right,
I
for the sake of this discussion,
I was just wondering if it was close to just.
Well, it strikes me, maybe just to kind of keep rolling here, I think Tom added a good point. When folks, maybe it's 500 or 1,000 for now. We can kind of leave both on the table. We don't need to decide that right now. But those two numbers
I
seem,
think it's a bit of a blunt instrument, but it's a good start, and I agree with you, Rob, that it could be applied, you know, in 5-year increments, which is a natural condition. Plus, we need to see more technologies develop and be available, and hopefully prices come down, which is gonna make it more likely that, you know, this can be applied.
You said other towns are looking at these numbers as well. Have they adopted a 5-year or 1,000? I mean,
they have,
not 5 years,
both
500 feet or
Tisbury-
1,000 feet.
both Tisbury and Wellfleet are in the process. We have a meeting tomorrow night discussing this, but neither have done it yet. They have the health regs on other triggers, but they are now also looking at these
So they haven't
setbacks. They haven't done it yet.
All right.
before we leave this one, we spent some time talking about the distances. What about the 10-year part? So there was 2 ways, as we talked about, to deal with the, if you were required to put in an IA, but the sewer was coming in the near future. And the 2 ways were, if you put the if the sewer's coming within X amount of time, you're not required to put the IA in. The other way is, if you put the IA in, you then get a 20-year waiver until you have to connect to the sewer. The second one felt like it might be derogatory towards the actual nitrogen removal goals of the plan, so we went with the first one, but for completeness, we went back and forth on that conversation.
We're on second solid bullet now, right?
No, we're on the third sub-bullet on the first solid bullet.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay, because it comes up
And
again.
it comes up a couple times, we use the same
So
thing.
I had one thought on that. This comes up a lot. You know, what do you do with a parcel within a potential future sewered area? We've been talking about 55 grand as an average for NR system. The marginal, if somebody's in there and they got a new house or an addition, they gotta put a system in. I think the marginal cost is about 25,000, because these systems cost around 22,000 plus another few thousand add-on for the additional excavator work, landscaping, which is gonna be marginal, because they're already gonna be digging up their yard, so. One thing to keep in mind is I think there is an opportunity, again, to reduce costs by getting these in when somebody's already digging up their yard. They already gotta put a system in. So in that case, I would argue, or not argue, but just put it on the table to think about, maybe in those cases, the cost to the town to fix the water really isn't the 55, it's the 25.
Are you and I looking at the same sub-bullet?
Sorry?
Pull it up.
Are you looking at the same sub-bullet that I'm looking at? What I'm talking about is not the cost bullet, it's the time bullet.
Right, but that's what the reason I'm saying it now is because the question, I guess, is if the sewer's coming in 10 years, do you have them put an NR system in? Isn't that what we're talking about?
Yeah, so it's behind you right there. It's basically saying, you know,
Yeah.
and that 10 years is purely, we took a guess. As I said, there was 2 ways we looked at it. I'd be curious to get the committee's thinking on, A, one of those 2 ways, and B, is if we decide this is the way, is 10 years the number, is 5 years the number, is 15 years the number, is 20 years the number.
So my point here is if somebody's building a house, the sewer's coming in 10 years, they gotta put a Title V in.
Well, right.
They're putting in 20 some odd grand, right? For another 25, we've sort of solved a lot of the problem, right? So in that case, the difference is just the 25, as opposed to whatever the sewering cost is gonna be eventually, right?
You're saying it's in lieu of sewering?
Possibly, or for a period of time. So you don't wanna charge them, these are tricky, these are complex questions. You said you might give them a period, like a grace period, right? 20 years to hook up to the sewer?
Yeah, I guess I'm not thinking of this in the same way you're thinking of this.
Okay.
So I'm thinking of it from the existing home.
Yep.
Okay. Mrs. Smith, has an existing home.
All right.
They're septic, they're due to be sewered within some period of time. In this case, let's say 10 years. And their septic system has failed. Or they're trying to sell the house and it didn't pass inspection, or some other natural trigger. The question was, at that point, is there a limit where you say, okay, you don't actually have to deal with that trigger right now, you could do a tight tank, or as long as your system's still operating, you can still operate that system because we know sewer's coming. I think everybody would argue, if sewer is coming next month, you certainly wouldn't let them do it. If sewer's coming 30 years from now, you're gonna make them do it. And so the question is,
Where's the break point?
where's that break point in the middle?
Right.
We sort of said, okay, 10 to start this conversation, but really wanted to hear you guys debate that point. And then the other thing we had talked about is the other way to potentially do this is say, you immediately have to put in the IA system.
Right.
But then you have a 20-year waiver on hookup. Where that may hurt us is on nitrogen removal and timing of nitrogen removal, going back to the permit, having to have so much removed by a certain period of time. So that's why we went with this route.
Yeah.
But you all need to debate that, because that's literally an arbitrary number we picked.
Thoughts?
So he was talking about existing homes and you're talking about new.
Yeah, I think that's where we're missing
New
each other. I was
builds.
talking about new homes
Yeah, yeah.
and
New homes.
expansions. Basically, anytime somebody's gonna dig up the yard is when I start thinking, that's a good time.
Okay, but if you have an existing, because a lot of the times that Kelly gets called on,
75% of the phone calls I get from the health division is exactly that question. Ex-homeowner is calling because their system failed, they're freaking out because they wanna know when sewer's coming and what their options are. And I can't speak to what the health division has been doing or the Board of Health has been doing, but generally I've seen usually if they're getting sewer within a year, maybe up to 2 years, they're working with them. They're not requiring them to replace their system immediately. So to Rob's point, the question I think this committee needs to figure out or needs to answer is, what is that breaking point? Because more often than not, it's gonna be the existing home that has the issue, not the new build. Those are the folks who are struggling because they're trying to figure out what their next step is and if they need to replace their system.
Kelly, when you say they're working with them, what do they let them do?
I don't know. Quite honestly, I don't know. I would assume in some situations, depending upon how close they are to sewer connection, they've required, and it's also dependent on the nature of the failure too. So I shouldn't say I don't know. My experience is, depending upon the nature of the failure and how closely they're going to be connecting to sewer, usually within a year, they've been requiring additional pumps, for example, like pump your septic more times.
So a tight tank, essentially.
Yeah, sometimes they require a 2,000-gallon tight tank and an alarm system.
Yeah.
But I've seen them do it for 7 years.
It seems like that's,
Yes, yeah.
You can pump it for 7 years. It's like,
at what time, sorry.
legally, can you use a tight tank for 7 years? I'm
I
not.
mean, how long, I'm just trying to get a sense of how long they let them stay in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question. It sounds like Counselor Starr actually has more experience with what they're allowing than I do, because generally that's where,
I've seen 7 years.
7 years.
7 years.
So up to,
generally where the conversation ends with me is when are they anticipated to connect to sewer?
So they sort of work it out with everybody who comes in and has their sob story.
Subjective.
I only use it in the summer and, my kids don't come anymore and I go to, Florida in the winter, but that could change any minute.
Yeah, to
So you're
Counselor
saying it's
Starr's,
subjective.
Yeah.
to Counselor
Right, yeah.
Starr's point, I don't think there's a specific trend. I think it really is been very subjective to the situation. There hasn't been like a steady theme.
Seems like if you're putting in as soon as they put in a alternate system, you're ahead of the game. And so give them some time on the other end before when they have to hook up. But you're still ahead of the game, because you're, at least at that point, that site, you're taking nitrogen out.
although that's why I was asking about the tight tank. A tight tank is
that's zero. That's zero.
So if that's reasonable for X amount of years, that's better than any IA system, as long as you, but I don't think that's allowed for too long under Title V, right?
Yeah, I
Repair.
don't know what the
There are certain Title V restrictions
Yeah.
to what they can do, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I was surprised, 7 years sounds like a long time to me for them to allow a tight tank.
Yeah, I don't know, most of the conversations I've had, it's been folks like 2 years and under.
So,
Self-enforcing, you don't pump your tight tank, you're screwed.
Yeah.
Right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
Chris,
Back up in your house.
we talked about bringing the Board of Health people back in.
Yeah.
Let's put this on high on the list, and maybe we can ask them to come for some best available data estimates on how many, you know, give us some facts and figures on how often this occurs, what are they allowing, you know. I mean, they're the public health experts, we're not gonna override that.
I just want to make sure we touched on that. We
Yeah,
didn't
no,
just
it's
blast
good.
by it.
That's
Yes.
assuming they're making decisions on public health bases.
Right.
Well, on these issues, they're not.
Correct, right.
On someone can't afford it, what does that have to do with public health?
Right.
Or where they connect to the sewer. That's not a public health issue, but they're weighing in on those matters
Yep, yep.
regularly.
Okay, but I think this is important stuff, because we don't wanna make recommendations that aren't gonna work and are gonna be in conflict with what the Board of Health is dealing with on a daily basis, as the realities of life, right? So we need to learn what that is.
Griffin, what do you got?
I was just gonna note that we've talked about new buildings, new homes, we've talked about existing homes that have septic failed.
Yeah.
In the first sub-bullet, there was also the identification of property transfer as well. So there are some other triggers that have been identified here that haven't necessarily been discussed yet, so I just wanted to point that out, because we only talked about new versus kind of failed, so.
I think it's very important.
So there might, what you're suggesting, Griffin, is there might be different actions.
Yeah, we've listed different
Yeah, no, I think
triggers
that
there,
makes
so
sense.
I just wanted to point out that there's more than what we just talked about, so.
Covers a lot of your new development.
I think that
It's changed, then it's
Right,
new development.
Right, right.
Butch is making an important point in getting ahead of the game. It ties, I think, Tom Camberry back into your point, which is time to travel.
Right.
So there is probably math we can apply to that, depending on what the word usage is and what the implied load is. You can kind of look at what that cost could be. So I do like the idea of a 20-year pass or something like that to incentivize and also to balance out the fact that you're doing it.
Are you suggesting there's a formula for
I
determining
think there
how
could be
long
I think there could be a
passes?
formula.
The last bullet on the first page also speaks to that a little bit. We'll get back to that when we get to the very last bullet.
Right.
Well, so where are we now, Rob?
So I think we've done a good job talking this one out. What I'm taking away from this conversation, and correct me if you're feeling otherwise, is that at this point, we're comfortable with this bullet, except for we're still debating, was it 500, is it 1,000? There's that conversation's going on.
Yep.
We want to have a conversation with the Board of Health on the 10-year piece in terms of what they're saying. But the rest of it, I'm hearing general comfort with the rest of it, and we can move on to the next main bullet. Is that a fair summary?
Good by me.
I think so.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question, just some food for thought. So you say you do this, you make this recommendation, what do you get out of this? Bullet one.
Which particular recommendation are you talking about?
Bullet one,
Bullet one.
500 feet, 1,000 feet. What do you get out of it?
What's the benefit?
Yeah.
Well, we have the numbers of systems, we can translate that to kilograms of nitrogen pretty easily, right?
The numbers.
What does it do for you?
For me?
If you've exceeded your capacity by 100%, what does this do for you?
You mean
Does
for
it
the,
30 years early, that's what it does. And that's important math.
Does what 30 years early?
Getting nitrogen out.
Nitrogen a lot sooner than you otherwise would have, because none of these, almost none, very few, I would argue, are gonna be picked up very quickly, right? No? We look at-
Yeah,
we
you're
look at-
asking-
we
I'm
look
just
at
thinking,
that. We
sometimes I
can
have to
do
think.
that. We
Yeah,
can
you're
do that.
asking
We
about
can
how
look
does
at
this
that
help
math.
us?
And so I would
I'm
say.
saying, you said it yourself, this is arbitrary. My point is, if you go before a town council or a policymaking body, they're gonna wanna know what the basis for your decision is. How do you justify this?
Yeah.
I'm just asking you to think about that.
No, it's a
I'm
good-
not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just saying.
Okay, I
you
didn't
should be
understand your
prepared-
point
You
initially,
should be
but-
prepared to justify your recommendation.
Yeah,
And if
good
it's,
point.
well, we're just removing nitrogen, okay, to what end? Does it get us below something? Does it get us
I
to
would
a certain
say-
number?
I would say there's 2 points, and if we could, these are good, because you could get these in the notes. One is the time of travel, faster, because I've said this before, I for one, think I would spend more money to have a water quality improvement sooner and less money later, that's just me, right?
Well, the time of
That's
travel, but.
But the other one, and Rob said this several times, the MEP report is far from perfect. In fact, it is wrong, okay? Brian Howes would say that if we were here. It's the best available estimate. There's all kinds of questions about it, so we don't know that it's perfectly accurate. So as Rob says, we probably need to do more than what's in the CWMP, long term. It's getting a little warmer out there. The next four years, probably gonna get warmer faster.
Back to your first thing, so you've got, say it's steady state nitrogen moving through the system for 50 years of development.
Yeah.
You've got, whatever, 50 milligrams per liter coming through. You've got a house 500 feet. You remove what? One house's worth of nitrogen. So you've removed 1 milligram per liter of that 50.
Oh, that's why we need numbers, right?
Well,
That's why you need more than one house.
even so.
It's all a
But-
cumulative story.
But if you don't
What's
do
your
anything
point?
for
I'm
out
not sure I
there, you're
understand
waiting
your point.
20, 30 years before anything happens. So if you have a CWMP that's, with a permit and you've got 5-year, check-in values for reports and you're paying people to go monitor sentinel stations all this time, you'll be wasting money measuring sentinel stations for the next 30 years when you're not doing anything. So if you start with putting some IAs in near the shore and get at a substantial number, and that's why I'm thinking 5 years time of travel would be more like 1,000. Then you're removing some nitrogen, and then you might see something within these 5-year check-in periods, rather than just like an engineering report of we've done this and we've done that.
You just said it,
we've
you
done
might
that.
see something, but you're asking people to spend real money to do something that might give you a benefit.
Well, okay,
You don't
I
have-
know for a
but you
fact
have
we'll be
equal- you have
reducing
equal
nitrogen.
uncertainty, you're gonna get to phase 3 of your plan anyway, because we don't have enough money. That would be my argument, was great. Give me certainty that you're gonna get to phase 3 and raise money. How many tax increases are we gonna need to get to phase 2? So I would say the certainty of getting some stuff done is easily worth the uncertainty of getting a lot of stuff done later. So getting a little done and you know it's done,
Maybe a little
versus
doesn't-
getting a lot done, you don't know if you can do it.
But a little may not make any difference in the water body.
Well, so what do you then do, nothing? I mean,
Sure.
Dan, I think these are really good questions.
I'm not against it.
I know.
I'm being a devil's
I think
advocate
these are good
here.
questions.
You're gonna get
We
these
should-
questions.
Absolutely. So again, help me. So the two that I'm hearing is time of travel and the uncertainty of the model. I think we're, I can go through 3 or 4 things about the MEP model that I think are under estimates.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm smiling and laughing because we have this debate routinely. Dana and I have gone head to head on this very question. I'm glad he's now fighting you, not me.
I would like to
Fighting
just add something, because I don't think, to Dan's point, he's playing devil's advocate to get you to think about how you're gonna potentially present this to town council. And I think another piece is the public outreach and communications aspect of it, because, and I think it was Councilor Clark who mentioned that potentially there's going to be a number of potentially new counselors, or there's gonna be counselors who we're going into an election season. So you're gonna have to come with facts and data, not just, well, we think, or this feels like, because they're probably gonna be there's gonna be some resistance to asking people to spend more money who weren't expecting to spend money at either this junction or at all.
Well, I think the facts and data we can bring, A, is the time of travel. That's pretty clear. And the other one is we can translate this to kilograms and relate that to the MEP nitrogen removal requirements. So, if we need to remove 20,000 kilograms and this removes 7,000, that's 1/3 of the way there. And those are all numbers that I think are bankable because that's what MEP and DEP are using.
So
we can do that.
not to poison the well or help the well, whatever we're gonna do. Remember too, it's gonna be whatever we do with the IAs is additive to what we do with the bogs, what we do with the pond, what we do. All, the way the CMP's talked about it, all of those alternatives are cumulative in their value to the program. All of which with an eye towards, to your point on phase 3, hopefully maybe never doing phase 3, which is the very last bullet on here, to some extent. But at this point in time, it's the value of the IAs, which may be small, to the value, with the value of the ponds and the bogs, which I actually think is gonna be bigger, to the value of, you know, aquaculture at the bottom, which probably is gonna be small, to the very minute value of the storm drain, the stormwater stuff that we've done, et cetera. So all of it's additive together to try to come up with something that, you know, do you see a signal? Do you see that input or not? So, just put it that.
I don't know if I'm understanding this correctly, but you listed how many parcels would be affected by this? In other words, the property would have to be transferred.
Better than this map.
Right, but, no, in other words, you capture a certain number, right?
Yeah.
But then you capture them only if they're being transferred,
Or
sold,
failure.
or failure.
So-
Is there any estimate on what that's likely to be? Does anybody?
No.
So who's
temporal
gonna be
nature of this-
impacted by this, in other words?
Yeah, I mean, so realistically, if you took 500 feet, I think getting to what you're saying,
Yeah.
are 1,892 people gonna have to tomorrow deal with this? No.
No, yeah,
No,
obviously
it's
not.
at the what we talked about in here, and again, it's up for the committee's debate, it's at the natural, something's happened to your Title V and you gotta deal with it. Either you're moving, or you're expanding, or it's dying, or you're pumping it beyond a certain number of times.
Right.
Now you've gotta deal with it. So yes, to your point, of the 1,892, 10% get done in a year, 5% get done in a year. It's not, all those have to go at once. It's just, once they do go, you can't go back with the Title V.
And to the question
Has
earlier.
anybody made a projection about what that number is
I wouldn't even,
likely to be?
I wouldn't even know how to
Yeah,
do
that's
it.
multivariable calculus.
I don't even know how to.
To the conversation that was had earlier about the 10-year trigger, it's
Yeah.
important to that point because if there's a 10-year opt-out, so to speak, a large portion of those 1,892 will be sewered by 10 years from now.
Yeah.
If you look at those figures up there, that's why we gave you the phase 1, the phase 2, et cetera. That shows that about 740 of them will be sewered by phase 2.
Go back to the number.
So there'll be an opt-out there theoretically, because that's 10 years from now. So,
It's the figure you were just.
No,
saying.
I know.
Oh.
yeah.
Let me just zoom back out.
So some of
Yeah.
that trigger kind of makes a difference too as to how many it will pick
Scroll
up.
to the right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other option. The town could require, much like the original Title V proposal, right, that all systems with 500 must be upgraded within X years. Board of Health could do that. DEP did that. That's what Title V says, right, unless you do a watershed permit. So certainly they could do that.
Why is there still cesspools?
Sorry?
Why are there still cesspools?
You're mean.
Why are there still cesspools?
Why are there still
Oh,
cesspools?
why are there still cesspools?
If you say DEP said within so many years you gotta upgrade
Well,
your
that's what the
system.
watershed regs say. That's the new Title V thing. And the reason is because all the towns are opting to do a watershed permit instead, right? No, Bourne, the only one maybe that won't, but all the logical towns are opting for the watershed permit approach so that,
Careful, this is televised.
I don't care, I'll say that publicly, it's crazy.
You just did. Should we move on to the next major bullet?
Yes.
Because we are gonna run out of time at some point.
So that point does bring back that maybe 1,000 is what we should be looking at.
Well, I think let's leave it 500 or 1,000 for now, because I think Tom made a good point. 500 is the first point, but we should keep it, maybe either or.
What do you need to make a decision about which one?
I think it's only,
We'd
again,
like to see
time
the
of travel.
comparison.
We can calculate the kilograms with the difference between the two and compare that to the reductions. Because I think the town council is going to be interested in, as you're kind of suggesting, is this insignificant?
But then it gets to Rob's point, which is then you need some kind of realistic assessment of what number of those is actually gonna turn.
That's
But
right.
isn't there historical numbers?
I was going to say, when we were gathering tonight, I was asking, I forget who we're talking, and I did write down the number. There were 30 36 failures per year on average during the last 5 years. So that's an example of one statistic we can get from the Board of Health.
Right, but that's townwide.
Right, but then you could make an assumption on, what percentage of the town is this, something like that.
Well, we can certainly make assumptions and stuff, but
Look at the sales numbers.
But I would-
Sales of houses every year in the town.
certainly wouldn't stake my mortgage on that, on what we're gonna come out of that, because there's a lot of variable, to Griffin's point, there's a lot of variables to that, and you're trying to project how that's gonna go. But, I mean, I think you can make, I think maybe the easier way is just to assume 10% go a year of the people, of the ones within this area, or 5% go a year, and just state it, be overt about it, and then it's out there, and that's the planning point.
Well, we do have failure data, we do have transfer property data, which is pretty easy to get. So some of these we could,
You
I
have
think
to overlay it with the setbacks to know.
yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
I don't know, I just don't know the level of detail in the data.
The options are no information, we didn't think about any of this, and we have no idea, or perfect,
Make
we
some
don't
basic
have.
assumptions that if there's
Yeah,
36 failures townwide and there's 2,500 parcels, that's X%.
Exactly.
And if
Same
there
thing with
are
the sales.
5,000 sales in the year and
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
25,000 parcels, it's
Yeah,
X%.
so we're gonna have to make
So we can do
there'll be
that,
broad
yeah.
assumptions on that.
So we may want to, let me ask you this question, if we decide that we want to go that route in preparing for these hard questions, which again, it's great you're alerting to this, can we get some help doing some more calculations like this? Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna do that. We're not expecting you to do that.
So I think it would be good to know, Amber, given you've got this already in GIS, maybe what percentage of this, are these areas of the whole town? Or maybe more importantly, what percentage of the number of parcels in these areas is of the whole town?
Break down.
Because it may be that this is more density. That way when we get a townwide number, maybe we could use the 36 per year as an example.
Yep.
How might you use your GIS to then, how much of that is in this area?
Right, I think what
That's an
Griffin was
example.
saying is we can just apply it as a percentage across the
We would
town
make
and then compare
proportional
that to the
assumptions.
Yeah.
total number of parcels
Yep.
in 500
Yes.
feet or 1,000.
Yes.
So, yeah.
But then
we
we'll
can
at
do
least
that.
have some, we can have an answer to the question to our best available,
Yeah.
not gonna be perfect. What do you say,
And
Zee?
if we
Don't
could
let
have these,
perfect get in the way of good.
if we could have these maps by watershed, so they're not like, we're not seeing a chart that we
Okay.
can't figure out which watershed it is.
Let's keep going.
Next one?
Let's keep going.
That would be good.
All right, so next major bullet. And this came from a discussion that came after the meeting last time. Councilor Clark and we were talking, and then this is the cesspool bullet that we're on now. Basically, the thinking there was, look, if you have a cesspool, if you still somehow have a cesspool today, that should end. And then the two sub-bullets below it are trying to try to work that. By coincidence, Amber and I had an opportunity to have a nice pleasant conversation with Tom McKean this afternoon about this. He wanted to point out to the committee, because he is paying attention to this and watching, that apparently cesspools in town come in two flavors. There is the single cesspool, which is an automatic failure. However, back in the 80s, I think he said, there was a practice of allowing people that had failed cesspools to put leaching systems in the backside of their cesspools, which then made it a Title V in the board's mind. So,
Did it myself.
did you?
Yeah.
Okay, so
So it counts.
I don't quite understand that being a Title V, but okay.
Well, no, I mean, yeah, it does work. Your cesspool becomes your septic.
Becomes a
tank.
septic tank,
Yeah,
right.
leach.
Becomes a septic tank, yeah.
Beautiful.
But it's a septic tank that leaks a lot. But at any rate, because we went through this a little bit with him this afternoon, so he just want to make sure that as we're having this conversation, you understand, he's all on board with single tank cesspools. He said the other ones at this point are considered Title Vs, and you're gonna have to deal with them independently if you want to deal with them at all.
Rob, do I remember, I think didn't we ask him at the meeting if we knew the number, and I think he said no, right?
So what he knows, that's why we were on the phone. So what he knows is he knows from, I think it was the mid-90s or some point in time when his record-keeping system went into effect, what is a Title V since then, and he knows what is an IA since then. What he doesn't know is what was previous to then what it is, and what falls in the cracks between those two what it is, which is why our last sub-bullet in that big bullet was basically do that inventory by default, where you just sort of take out the stuff you know, and whatever's left is unknown, go inspect those properties and tell me what it is. He's not really keen on that idea. But that's how we tried to address it in these bullets here. It's not the only way it probably could be done, but yes, there is not a list of here's all the cesspools in town.
Can he go on property and inspect?
My understanding is he has the ability to do that,
Okay.
the permissions to do that. I think that's part of the regulations, but that's just my understanding of it. I could be
what,
really
inspections?
wrong.
And how many resources does he have to do that?
Understood, that's his argument.
Can we get an estimate by date, year of date?
Yeah.
Because what was,
You got an idea.
what was article, what was pre-Title V laws, article something?
Well, Title V was 78.
Right, so if
And
it's
then upgraded
pre-78,
originally in 95.
can we make an assumption that that's a, no?
But between when cesspools were put in every property and 78, there was a transition
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
a septic system that was more than a cesspool. That was,
The problem, Scott, is that the data's not available other than a manual review of every parcel in town.
So if a cesspool is working, it's functioning, it's not that much more nitrogen. getting
Right,
in.
not that
I mean,
much
so-
more.
So I'm not sure
10,
why we
20%.
need to.
All right,
Thank you.
all right, now you're hurting me on this one. Come on, this is the other debate Dan and I have.
oh, I totally agree with you.
And
Yeah.
my debate's been, look, just because we're having the debate, I'll
If it's
debate here.
more, it's a degree. I mean,
It's that, but the reality, but in a septic tank, you've got a higher residence time than you do in a cesspool theoretically, right? Because a cesspool is just basically a perforated tank, so it's effectively a straight pipe into the ground. So my understanding is that the septic tanks, and this is more your guys' field than mine, on the science side, they're getting some knock on nitrogen in those septic tanks. Whereas a cesspool, assuming full perk rate, and I grant you the ones we're talking about aren't at full perk rate, are just blowing everything right out the sides and going out to the ground, so it's just raw at that point. Where we were debating with Tom earlier today about this is that a failed cesspool, my guess is, doesn't go to a zero perk rate. My guess is it's still leaching some out directly, but it's retaining some. So does the residence time now in that tank allow the biological activity to get a knock on that? That I can't answer to you. You guys know better than I do on that, but
So I think
that's been our debate.
the importance of this to our discussion, I think, is not so much this debate, but it's how many might be generating these upgrades, right? 'Cause
Well,
that's
but your
what we're
debate's
trying to-
relevant in the sense that if it turns out, if Tom's right, and a cesspool really makes no significant difference than a Title V, then there's no point going independently after cesspools,
Right,
which has
it's a
been your
policy
argument.
decision, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Right, that's been Dan's argument.
It's a pretty big effort to go after these things,
It is.
I would think.
Now you get insight into our relationship.
Well, this is where we need to have the discussion with the Board of Health, right? Because they're on the front lines.
I can tell you what Tom said today was that he was supportive of going after the single tank cesspools because they're already in failure by definition of the Title V regulations.
I agree with that.
But that the ones that were the modified cesspools with the leaching system on the backside, technically they're not in failure. So his mind, and correct me if you heard otherwise, his mind, he doesn't feel like he's got regulatory authority to go after them anyways. That kind of,
Probably not gonna have the resources to go find them.
and he doesn't have the resources.
So it really probably needs to be a trigger based on a house transaction.
But I thought that's the reason why a lot of these are
That's when the
here.
inspection has to happen.
Well, yeah, that is the reason
Right.
why a lot of them are here, because they keep getting passed from family to family and it's not triggering that part of the process.
Yeah, that was my
Like,
understanding
the
of why
number
there
of
actually
family
is a bunch of cesspools, is because they never trigger. They never reach that trigger point, because to Kelly's point, they're just inherited and passed throughout a family and they never transfer.
That's-
But if
So
it's,
the-
but if it's a property transaction,
Right.
you're gonna know what
Right.
it is, because
Is it-
there's a report that comes back and it says
There's a
it's
deed
acceptable or
change,
whatever.
then we have a regulation, that says when
Right.
there's a deed change, and
Right.
it doesn't matter if it's the same family, that
That
triggers
could,
Could do it.
an inspection or an upgrade or.
I think one thing we're after
It's a
here is
loophole.
the Board of Health or the Health Department to give us some estimates of what how many of these triggers there might be, so that we can then tell the town council, to Dan's question, how much of a difference is this gonna make? How many are out there? How many over 10 years or whatever? Whatever we can get from the Health Department, Board of Health on numbers, we got one thing, we got failures, and we can prorate that to these areas.
This is townwide, right? Not just in the.
Right.
This would be townwide. Well, as it's written here, it'd be townwide.
Exactly.
So the number you're looking for is the number of files that need to be researched to know how many cesspools?
I'm not
Is
sure.
that- What, like, you said you're looking for a number, but what Rob was saying is there's basically a period between 1978 and the mid-90s where we don't know if it's been upgraded to a Title V or if it's still a cesspool, so
But is it-
we could probably get that number, but then that would be the number of files that somebody needs to.
I mean, I think we're just asking for the best, they're in the position better than anybody to estimate this, right? So
But again, we literally this afternoon had this conversation with him.
We've asked the question a couple
He is very resistant to
times.
trying to, I don't have a number, I don't know. I only know by virtue of, I know it's not this and I know it's not this, so maybe it is how they look at it. That's how they view it. They have no files on it.
I think, you know, to me, in the end, we've gotta have a delivery that's relatively simple. We can't have a really complex thing that we're gonna deliver.
yeah.
I think to Dan's point, it's important to say we're gonna deliver something that can actually make a difference. But there may be a mosaic of that, so I would argue, yes, it is important to try to get the things that are closest to the water, 500 feet or whatever, in order to say, well, this cohort is actually gonna make a difference. But I think you also may say, anywhere in town, if there is a septic, a cesspool that fails, it should be upgraded to new technology, which is away from the purview of what you might say, because you might say, we're gonna solve the problem, we're gonna more than solve the problem, we're 81%, not just 70, so why do it at all? And I would say because we're putting in systems, by putting in new Title V systems that are essentially polluting machines for the next 30, 50 years. Why are we doing that? That to me is ridiculous. We shouldn't do it. We should say, it's gotta stop, even beyond the purview of where the mapping is. And that to me is an idea that we at least need to table in some degree. And to me, the cesspool idea is a good start. We need to learn more about these technologies. They're not perfect. They're early, but they're looking pretty good. But I mean, the decision was made ultimately to say, you're not gonna do cesspools anymore, you're gonna do Title V's, right? So there's always a transition time.
So if the cesspool is located outside one of these nitrogen sensitive areas or whatever,
The nitrogen sensitive area is all of Cape Cod, essentially on the south side.
well, according to the regulation and the objectives we're trying to achieve, does
I
that
mean,
make sense?
that's different
Does it
from
make
the water,
sense to put
it's
in
different
an
than the
IA
watershed
system?
permit, which is not just dealing with the nitrogen sensitive area, that goes beyond, am I right? Nitrogen sensitive area encompasses beyond what we have for a watershed permit, correct?
Where there's
That's right.
private
I'm not following
wells,
the question.
there's private
I'm not following
wells,
what your
I'm not following
question
the
is.
question.
some twos,
The
but
designated nitrogen sensitive area by DEP is essentially the entire south coastal area of Cape Cod. It is not ring fenced just by the areas that we're talking about dealing with in a three-phase, 30-year plan. It's outside of those areas. The nitrogen sensitive area encompasses the entire
In our
area.
case, everything on
Yeah.
the south side is
I don't
within
know about that.
our CWMP and within the plan. Is that, am I?
I don't know, the map
know
that
if I'm
I've seen is like the entire area.
Well, I was gonna say, there is a map.
They have defined nitrogen sensitive areas.
Yeah.
Because Title V
Correct.
had it in the regulations, but they never defined it.
Yeah, they
Other
have,
than an on-site system where there's a lot and a well in the same.
they have a map that has nitrogen sensitive areas and then a separate color for potential to be a nitrogen sensitive area.
So like zone
Which is
twos, they have their,
greater than what
you know,
was-
they
Which is
are
greater, yeah.
regulated
Right,
under Title
that's what I'm
V, they
saying.
have a certain nitrogen loading standard they have to achieve, so that's not, it's nitrogen sensitive, but it's achieved through a performance standard within the regulation. And other nitrogen sensitive areas would be an area of private wells. That's nitrogen sensitive area. Now with this regulation, we have coastal water nitrogen sensitive areas. But if you're outside, if you're, I don't know, outside one of these, the watershed, well, most of the watershed, if you look.
Barnstable Harbor watershed would be outside, yeah.
Yeah,
Portions of it,
Probably pull
yeah.
up the map,
Yeah.
it's in our presentation.
I don't know, so anyway, I'm just being a devil's advocate here, so, you know, if you have a cesspool that's not in a nitrogen sensitive area, do you need to do best available technology?
I'm just thinking, the other reason to consider the 1,000-foot buffer is back to, we're not gonna get all these quickly. So, because, you know, the triggers aren't gonna be that effective.
It's
3 years travel time versus 1.5 is still pretty good. That suggests to me we cast the net a little wider, because we're gonna get less, and people are gonna oppose it, you know, it's gonna be hard. But, so if we're gonna try to make a difference to the town council and say we can reduce a significant amount of kilograms, we probably need a wider net. So That's my other thought. I'm not suggesting we decide that right now, but maybe the 1,000 feet is a nice, better number.
All right, any more, because I'm cognizant of time.
Great.
Any more on cesspools, or do you guys want to think about that a little bit more? Or is what I'm hearing, just to try to summarize, I'm not hearing a lot of support basically for the cesspool thing. It's just kind of me on an island. And so do we want to just drop that for right now? Is that kind of what you were saying, Z, is drop that and focus more on the first one? Or keep that, where are we at?
I'm saying let's get down to some focused areas where we can deliver something that is relatively straightforward to town council without it being a complex mosaic of this lever and that lever.
But to you, does that mean that second bullet, we should just strike that for right now? Or should we keep it? What's the sense? Because I'm hearing a bunch of different, I'm not hearing in a consensus here.
In my mind, I continue to think the 500 foot is a good starting point.
Yep.
I think we're gonna find out that the math is not particularly gigantic, to Dan's point. It might be 30 or 50 homes a year or something like that. It's not gonna be huge, but I do think it's a start and it's important to make a start. It may be that we take the 2,000 foot area and say within that area, if you have a cesspool, it's gotta get upgraded, for instance, okay?
Okay.
Not that complicated to do. It's probably not that onerous to do, in my view. And there might be a couple of things like that. I do agree that we should do something that allows some sort of a pass if somebody puts it in and yet they were gonna get sewered within some period of time, they do get an extension of 20 years or whatever the math is in order to do that. I think that's also,
But that's I understand the first bullet at this point. Tom, you seem to have a different perspective on that second bullet with the cesspools.
Yeah, I think it kind of distracts from the objective of nitrogen reduction in watersheds and in the areas that we're talking about. We're talking about trying to convince people that we've identified an area that we think needs to be expedited for nitrogen removal. Oh yeah, by the way, if you have a septic system anywhere else in town, you should do that too, just for the heck of it. I mean, I don't know.
Okay.
That's the way
It is called a comprehensive wastewater management plan, and there's more to the town than just the nitrogen sensitive areas.
I mean, you get into the whole issues of setbacks to ponds and things like that. That's something different. I would hope the Board of Health would be requiring upgrades. In that case, I would suspect it would be near ponds and things like that.
Anybody else want to take a bite at the cesspool one, or are we pretty much at the end of that conversation?
I would not take it out. I think it's still in the mix.
Okay.
But I don't think we need to talk about it anymore. I think we beat it to death.
Okay, the next major bullet was, I alluded to it earlier, and we went back to your presentation, we were trying to figure out how to tease all this together in a way where, and I'll read it to you in this case, because it's just one bullet. For property owners mandated to replace their property's on-site wastewater treatment systems with best available technology, and that's reference to things above, obviously, and whose annual income and/or residency status does not allow them to access the full benefit of the Massachusetts Title V septic tax credit. That's going back to Z's presentation and trying to get our heads wrapped around Z's presentation. The town should explore opportunities to make up the difference in cost between a Title V system and the best available technology. This came from a debate Dan and I had at one point, and you've heard some of it here, where we're debating. That's good debate.
Fairness, we do.
We debate a lot. Where, he's like, okay, so you're asking the homeowner, and you've heard some of it here, to take on additional cost burden, and so coming out of that, we said, look, they have to do something anyways, because if the Title V's died, they gotta put a Title V in. The town is deciding that for its goals regarding water quality and things of that nature, that we want you to do this additional thing. And is it appropriate, and I'm not saying I have the answer to that, I'm posing it just as a discussion point, is it appropriate then to have something that shrinks that delta between a Title V and an IA? One of the things we talked about briefly as we were trying to craft the wording on this is maybe that's, if it's just another tank in the middle, the town buys all those tanks. Or maybe that's a different tax program that allows people that don't itemize to take advantage of it. Or maybe that's whatever. But anyways, we wanted to put out there, because we've heard this, and it came out as E's presentation, it came out of a couple, we wanted to put something in here about the financial piece. This is your bullet to just chew on for financial piece.
I have one question. I don't know if this is feasible at all, does the town have the ability to offer a tax abatement, if that's the right term, in exchange
Mark Milton says
for?
no.
What's that?
Mark Milton says not without the state legislature. Got somebody who might weigh in on this. I'm sure you've got an encyclopedic knowledge of this particular aspect. Mark Milton said no.
Right.
He said you need a special vote, something. The legislature has to approve that for a municipality in order to offer it.
Did say that.
But that doesn't mean there isn't something that could be done. I think
It doesn't mean you won't get it either. If you ask for it, you could get it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's the process, special act.
Process, yeah.
I'm also remembering that I think Falmouth has pushed some
They're looking at it,
legislative
yeah, they're
change
pushing it that
to try to
direction,
change
yeah.
this, right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't affect by the income. I don't know what the status of that is. Did we hear from Steve Rafferty?
I haven't heard lately.
Yeah.
So that's the $18,000 over 4
I
years?
think-
Yeah,
They raised the same question.
yeah.
My recollection is they were gonna try to file legislation. I don't know who the rep from Falmouth is, state rep,
Vieira?
maybe.
Yeah, David Vieira.
Yeah, and they were gonna try to get this extended, because frankly, it doesn't make sense. It should be the other way around, right?
Yeah.
You give the tax credit to the people who can't afford it. Right now, you're giving the tax credit to people who can afford it.
Right.
Doesn't make sense. So hopefully that's, I don't know whether there's any prognosis on where that stands, but that's the other thing that I think is happening, which would simplify this.
So just to kind of poke the discussion a little bit, does the committee agree with sort of the broad concept that there's value in trying to find a way to compensate for the delta if you're mandating IAs where Title Vs were currently before? To devil's advocate that, and I'm not saying this is my position or not, but I know like in the 1990s when my cesspool died and I had to put a Title V in, no one came and said, I'm gonna give you the delta between your Title V and your cesspool. They just said, you can't put a cesspool back, you gotta go put a Title V in. And that's what I ended up having to do. So what's the committee's thinking regarding that?
Doesn't the Aqua Fund help this out?
They have 0% loans. So there's no interest loans that are available, but and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what the committee says, look, that's your avenue, that's what
Better
you
than going
got.
to the bank.
And you get the tax credit, state tax credit.
I mean, tax credit's better than a loan because it's essentially money in your pocket. A loan you gotta pay back.
But there was,
I think the opportunity in my mind is we have an existing law the governor signed. You can get a tax credit, okay, if you're a full-time resident. And people should be taking advantage of it, and I think we should probably advertise that as a town, saying, our records say you're a resident.
Yeah.
Maybe it says you're a resident and you have a septic system by our records that's X years old, I don't know, we can figure that out. Maybe it's time to take advantage of this.
Yeah.
Outside of offering any further incentive, I think that's potentially a pretty powerful incentive. As I looked at it in summer, we had demographics in this, it's about half the town that could get the full credit.
18,000.
We do, just on that note, we do heavily advertise that. It's on the website, it's in the sewer connection handbook. We host, every 6 to 8 weeks, a workshop with the Adult Community Center where we push the fact that there's this available tax credit. We push the Aqua Fund very heavily. We go through sort of the various criteria involved, so.
But maybe it goes out with your tax bill, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm not disagreeing with you, but
A lot of
I just
people
want
don't
people
look
to
at the
know
website.
that we
Yeah.
are doing our
That's good,
best
that's
to
good.
promote that. And I also make it very clear to folks too that it's not just for sewer connections, that it is also for the septic upgrades as well.
So on this financing thing, I just wanna, I think I may have said this before, but again, I hate to keep bringing up Wellfleet, but we are learning things. So just to remind, we were successful in Wellfleet to get an SRF loan, which would then set up the town for a 50% loan forgiveness because we were less than $1 million. Everything was for EIA upgrade. It was the first time it was done, okay? We got approved twice. And then recently, 3 months ago, we got a call from DEP, hey, we want to talk. And they said, we've changed our minds.
Never mind.
We don't want you to use SRF, we want you to use, and here's my question, there's a sister program called the Community Septic Management Program, I think is the name. You can Google it. It's also, and there is $5 million on the IUP list for this. So it is SRF related. I've called Aaron Perry, who's the staff person for the Cape Cod Commission and the Cape Islands Fund. They're trying to figure this out. I just want to, this is important, because if we're gonna go down this road, and I'm still of the opinion they should do SRF. There's no reason why they can't do SRF. The excuse was you can't spend public money on private property. That's been proven wrong. In New York State, New York is part of the United States, the Internal Revenue Service issued that decision. We have it in writing. So that's not a valid answer. So this is something that we need to, and I don't know who in the town, if we go down this road, which sounds like we're gonna do, this is a really important thing for financing. So I don't know who in the town, whether it's Mark Milne or Mark Ells or somebody, should be looking into this and pushing. Falmouth is pushing, but we need,
What do you want pushing? I've heard you say a couple different things, I'm not sure what you're pushing.
I'd like DEP to call us back again and say, you know, we told you we couldn't do it, but we can. Because that would be the nicest answer. The second best thing would be this community septic loan program, which is already a state program, is eligible for the same 25-50% loan forgiveness. And Aaron's supposedly working on that, but this is very amorphous. This is big money if this town goes down this program. So, Dan, I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts on who in town could help look into this?
Mark Milne is, all
Mark-
things finance,
Yeah.
and everyone pays attention to what he's saying, so
Okay.
he's the place to start, for sure.
Okay.
So,
Regional issue too. It's like we-
It is.
Commission, you really should.
Well, that's why
get on the
Aaron
stick
should
with
be,
that.
yeah.
so this, just in summary, the sense I'm getting from the committee, and correct me if I'm not understanding correctly, is that there's certainly an appetite for advertising the programs that are available. There's certainly an appetite to helping people avail themselves of those programs, whether it be the 0% or the existing tax programs or things of that nature. There's not a conversation right now about creating a new program per se to offset costs or things of that nature. Is that a fair statement?
If it was doable, it would be nice. I don't know what it is, though.
What was the last part of your comment, to offset costs?
So to offset the delta cost between a Title V and a 9.
How do we help out those people who don't get the 18K, I guess the question, right?
Yeah, that would be the subset, as we look, I think you said 91,000, where'd you get the 91,000 number?
91,000 is from Clean Water Coalition.
That's for the full, at 91K income, you get the full 18K credit. Below that, it's
Right, so it's like, what do you do with that?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that you come down below the 91, you get some subset.
prorated, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not like zero at
No,
90K,
no.
but.
Where is that coming from though? Because it's not, I don't see that listed.
Yeah, take a 5% income tax, which is the Massachusetts state level, and do the math of how do you get a credit at that level. $4,500 a year times 4 years gets you to $18,000. That's where that math comes from, right? It's an $18,000 tax credit over 4 years.
Up to 18,000.
$4,500 a year. That's how you get to 91,000 roughly. So I guess, to me, one of the things we could do is talk about regulations that could be put in place, 500 feet, this kind of thing, maybe the successful stuff. We could talk about how do we incentivize, which could be advertising that there's that this $18,000 available, blah, blah, blah. I also think there could be a long-term opportunity, where Scott left, a long-term opportunity to examine the idea of SRF funding for like phase 3. To me, phase 3 is still a planning opportunity to look at that and say, if we could lower the cost, if we actually are able to prove at that point that putting alternative septics in is 25% of the cost of sewer for that particular area because it's so far away, then I think it behooves us to understand what levers could we use to make that happen? Which, if we started to work on it sooner rather than later, we'd be ahead of the game.
And you take that one step further, is you've got 47% that's not even addressed currently.
Right.
So, those at some point are gonna have to be addressed if we wanna have any fresh water in town. And so, to the extent you can set up a program now that works, it can get applied there as well.
So these might be three categories that we could address as discrete categories of opportunity.
So that segues us kind of nicely to the very last bullet. I will preface this by saying this is not a DPW bullet, this is mine. If you hate this bullet, you hate me, that's fine. But this is not the DPW's position. This is where this bullet came from. I was thinking about your time of travel conversations, Tom and Scott, but I was thinking about the other side of the coin of that, which is your position was, hey, look, we want to get stuff that has the most immediate impact. But I started thinking about, what about the stuff that's going to have the longest travel time or the longest delay between when you make impact and when it actually affects the water body? And should we be going after some of that now, knowing that if it's a 30-year travel time as an example, and it looks like maybe from Amber's data some of it's not, but if it's a 30-year travel time as an example, the moment we do something, it's 30 years before that impact reaches the water body. The other thing we started thinking about is, okay, look, you've got phase 3, you know that's one septic lifetime away, probably for sure, because it's year 20 to 30. And we're at year 5, 6 right now. We're at year 5 now. So it's probably one septic lifetime away if your septic fails. Now, goes to a conversation you just had that we've said previously is, should you be allowed to replace the Title V with Title V? It doesn't make a lot of sense because it's just a polluting machine. So came up with this idea, and again, if this is a bad idea, I fully will own that, which is, should we go into the phase 3 area and say, look, if your septic system dies in the phase 3 area, we want you to start to utilize IA systems versus putting another Title V back. Does a couple things. One, it starts to affect nitrogen today, not literally, you know my point. So that way, when all the other things are done, maybe some of that benefits are actually arriving or not arriving at your estuary. The other thing it does is it starts getting people in the mode of like, we're flipping these over, we're having to deal with these things. And then in combination with, and only in combination with all the other things we've talked about in terms of alternatives, the way phase 3 is talked about in the CWP and the way it's always been discussed is, we're gonna take a look at what we can do with the alternatives and see if it does enough that we can offset some of phase 3, because phase 3 is the most difficult to sewer, it's the farthest away to sewer, it's topographically, topographically, thank you. That's why we have communicators. It's topographically difficult because it's up and down, so there's lots of pump stations. It's not very dense, so you're not getting a lot of homes at once. So I put this in as a new discussion item. It may be a really bad idea, but I put it on the table for discussion. It kind of goes against a little bit the 500-foot thing where we were trying to be really limited because it's now a different bigger area. But really the essence of this conversation is flipping the time of travel. You're talking about it from how can I make the impact quickly? I'm thinking about it from, I got stuff that's gonna take a long time, even once I do make an impact, to flush out the system. We should probably do that sooner than later. Like, open it up for criticism. Dan?
No, I think it's a good idea to go after that area because you can do the simple math on time to travel, which is we're not gonna start that project for another 20, 25 years. We're not gonna complete it for 35 years. And it's only after the completion time that we're gonna start to see.
It's another 30 years after
travel.
that,
So
and then
we're
it gets
like,
there.
we're all dead, unfortunately, at that point. Well, maybe not everybody.
There's some young people in the room that I feel so good about that.
Well, the old people in
My
the
son
room.
will be working at DPW.
So I think it's a good idea to go after that and see. I think that might fit in with your SRF funding question too, frankly, is, that might be, it might be a bite of the apple that the state is willing to consider Because it's probably a relatively manageable number.
For context,
looking
phase
at-
3 is about 2,000 parcels.
What's that?
Phase 3 is about 2,000 parcels.
Right, but you'd phase it. So
Yeah, no, I'm just giving you the number.
It would take, it would be 2,000 over some period of time.
And
so
geographically,
maybe-
where is it? I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, is that
It's
the
Marston's
upper-
Mills, basically, it's the
Marston's
big
Mills,
yellow,
it's
it's that big
basically-
yellow
Yeah,
area.
it's the,
Green Bay area.
it's the upper Three Bays area, and then it's there is a portion that is in West Hyannisport.
And how
Yeah,
much of
West
that
Hyannisport.
area is like within the 500 or, let's talk about the 1,000-foot
Well, there's a big,
setback? I mean, that'd be a lot
Put the
of
map
it.
up again?
hang on, we got a couple different maps we wanna show.
Which
So
maps do you want?
let's go, first show the phase 3 area.
Like Amber's map of Three
Tom,
Bays.
first thing though, look at the phase 3 area, go up,
Hang on.
nope, where are you going?
No, that was
That
the
was the,
phase
that's,
one
project.
project.
that's the phase 1 map.
There you go.
So phase 3 is that yellow area, of which the Marston's Mills River runs right up the middle of it.
Right. So some of it is within that time to
It would
travel.
overlap
A
some
lot
of
of it
those,
is
yeah.
in that.
So then you can go back to that other map, Chris, don't close this, but go back to the other one that showed that one.
Yeah, and then phase 3, total parcels.
So is this the outer boundary here?
No, that's the watershed boundary,
Yeah, that's the outer boundary of phase 3, right?
Yeah, so this would be parts of phase 3, right?
Part of that is not covered at all.
not all of it.
It's a little bit complicated.
So-
but
It's the majority of the area you're identifying, it's not all of it, but yes.
So there is overlap between those two, but it's on the table for a conversation.
And to Butch's point, importantly, you can see you're not dealing with all of the Indian ponds, which is,
I would say you're
Another
in that
conversation.
You just have
1,000-foot
to
zone,
address
you're
Long
getting,
Pond.
you're
What?
Marston's
targeting nitrogen that's gonna get to the system sooner. I don't know, about the whole, let's look at the 30 years and go after, what's gonna be hitting the embayment in 30 years. What we get out of that within our 5-year times of, project review in the water column.
Yeah, I think where I was going with that is that what you get out of that is that once we've, and this where I think Z, you were going, is that once you've completed the project as it currently is, it's still now another, let's say 30 years if it's the travel time, before really that impact arrives at the embayments. If we could start this piece now, though it's not the full removal, it's certainly more removal, and so thus it has impact sooner, so you might actually be able to see benefit within your lifetimes versus not. That was
The
what
start of
that
phase
thinking
3
was.
also incidentally happens to be approximately the life expectancy of a septic system.
Right.
Right.
Are you posing this new discussion as an alternative to the whole?
No,
In addition.
no,
Oh, in
it's
addition.
an and.
Okay.
Most of what I do is an and.
Yeah.
So it's an and, it's just something I started batting around, because you guys were talking about time of travel, and I was thinking about that, but I was thinking, there's the other side to that coin, which is, it takes, when you do impact things, you gotta, put it another way, the fast time of travel, as soon as you put sewer in, it affects it pretty immediately. It's the long time of travel that when you sewer it, it takes a long time before all that other nitrogen that's been put in the system for the next 20 years flushes its way out. If you could get at that nitrogen sooner, so that we're not putting as much in over the next 20 or 30 years, and then you put in sewer, you might make impact faster. That's what that was.
I think, first of all, I think this is a great idea. Thanks for including it. Second of all, I think maybe we could do this with different triggers in some of the other areas possible. We can make different triggers, different places, right? So again, I keep going back to situations where you're digging up the yard. Brand new house, put an addition on, system failed, gotta build a whole new system. The marginal cost, again, is not 55, it's 25. And if that person gets 18K tax credit, we're getting some pretty good benefits here for short money. It's probably 25 minus 18 for a lot of these people, 7K.
Okay.
Well, you might incentivize just that phase 3 area somehow to balance that out and accelerate the process. In my mind, you get a generation ahead of actually getting the impact on the water body you're trying to impact. It moves things ahead by a generation, I think.
You talk about it in terms of failed systems, right? How are those found?
Found or defined?
Yeah, in other words, how does the system become failed?
There's a couple ways where it can
What are
occur.
the triggers, in other words?
There's a couple triggers where it can occur, so somebody could have it backing up and call somebody out to inspect it, and that's how it's
Right.
found, right? When you go to sell a property, if you're getting a mortgage, you need to do a septic inspection, and then
Right, that's a
oftentimes
trigger.
it'll be found then.
Right.
Those would be the two most frequent triggers.
But if you're just doing an addition, you're not necessarily getting a trigger there, are you?
Yes.
Expansion?
If you're
putting in
expanding
additional
bedrooms,
Bedrooms will be the issue. right?
you would need to show, you wouldn't have to do a septic inspection to expand a bedroom though.
Do you have that list? Chris has got.
So it's the same list we're talking about in
It's a
the
similar-
context of the earlier discussion.
Right, so Chris has the list from the state.
The failure, and this is in my plain language, not what's actually in the regulations. There's seven different ways that a system fails. Backup of sewage as a result of clogged soil absorption system, discharge through ponding, surface breakout, or damp soils, the liquid level in the distribution box above the outlet invert, the liquid depth in cesspool less than 6 inches from inlet pipe or remaining available volume less than half 1 day's design flow, system requires pumping more than 4 times per year, a tank made of metal unless provided with a certificate of compliance, or tank is cracked / structurally unsound, or 7, the soil absorption system extends below the high groundwater elevation. That is what Title V says has failed.
But ultimately, I think to Griffin's point, you're gonna find those with a property transfer or
Or it
a physical
fails,
issue happening where someone gets called out to inspect it.
Can we get, I think the property transfer thing is a good trigger, because that data is available, and this is when all the stuff gets a lot clearer. So can we get some data on that?
Of course, it's changing all the time,
And
right? So
prorate
what-
that for these,
We should be able to find data on how many properties have transferred in the town each year for the past 5 years or something like that, or 10
can we,
years or whatever we
let's
want
do
to
that though, let's
Yep,
get that
we
into
can do
this,
that.
and then we can try to prorate that to, let's say, the 1,000-foot
Right.
buffer. I'm just looking at the clock again, and I think we should talk about, we have a meeting date, but I think we should talk about what we're gonna do at the next meeting, and where we take what Rob has started here. Again, I think, Rob, my sense is this is pretty on target, and I didn't hear a lot of no's with this. I think this makes sense, so.
So what I would suggest your next meeting be, and this is purely
Yeah,
a suggestion,
yeah.
is that we invite Tom and Tom
Yes,
back.
yes.
And then have some of these discussions. You've got another month to sort of think about it. You know, we've now had some preliminary discussions. Come back, we'll finalize those, have Tom and Tom here to be part of that. So that way, the conversations you've had about health, you know, there's been a couple times tonight I've heard you say we need to talk to health.
Yes.
They'd actually be here for that.
That's a good idea.
And then hopefully, at the end of that meeting, finalize or formalize whatever this is going to be, one way or the other.
Okay.
Does that seem reasonable to everybody?
Everybody?
Maybe it can be half and half, so maybe the first part of the meeting, the next meeting would be to talk about it, and the second half or some part, maybe it's a longer meeting, would be to actually hammer out some draft language.
Yeah.
And I think we could start to do that. I think it can be, what can we address from a regulatory standpoint? What can we address from an incentive standpoint? And then I think the longer term thing, which is your last point or your SRF funding point, which is what do we start to examine in the municipality to try to figure out how to lower the cost and still accelerate the treatment, which to me is largely phase 3. And it's theoretical up to a point, although I think it could be triggered potentially by saying, okay, we think we can do something in phase 3 and start, 5 years from now, and really start to accelerate a plan to roll out. Those would be my suggestions.
Okay, so we're not asking you to rewrite this anymore until next week. I think we want to talk about it in more detail with the health department. And then from there, we can, as you suggesting, then we can go into more detailed wordsmithing here. Does that make sense?
Question for you, Councilor Clark. As the Vice President of Town Council, I'll pick on you. Councilor Starr, weigh in. So the way the report's getting written, there's a whole bunch of this report that is what we did for the last 5 years, things of that nature that Kelly's working on. There will be this part, which is really sort of new ground to cover. My assumption is that the way this would be best digested by town council is bring in the new stuff, and then let you review the other stuff, if you wish. Is that aligned with your thinking in terms of how to present this? Or just because, to Z's point of crafting language, are we crafting like, not bills, what's the word I'm looking for? Orders, or things of that nature? Or is this more like a workshop discussion that then orders get crafted out of? Or how does council want to digest this?
I can share that with council president. We meet on Wednesday morning. But the agendas are getting jammed up. I mean, we've been through the budget season and flow neutral is coming up. We have deferred talking about or adopting town council rules, housing production plan, local comprehensive plan. So all these things are getting staged. So I'll leave it up to the council president to see. But what you're bringing forward is time sensitive, so I understand that. So we have one meeting in July after next week's meeting. One meeting in July, one meeting in August, then 2 again in September.
And September is when we'd be coming in. I didn't know if we should bring the whole report, draft report into you, or just the work that this committee has done and present the work that this committee has done as an independent standalone thing that then gets incorporated into the draft report when that's done. My assumption is the second one's probably going to be easier in terms of council digestion.
It's an action item.
Okay. I didn't want to assume that and not at least have the opportunity to ask you and talk it through.
So are you envisioning town council looks at this and then they recommend to the Board of Health to do this, some of these reg changes? Is that how you're seeing this play out?
So I think some of it's doctrinal to, some of it I don't know if it's Board of Health or not, to be honest with you. And that's kind of the conversation we're gonna have to have sort of next week in terms of what lives in whose box. Because at the end of the day, I think council would say, this is what we want to do, and then sort of delegate back to whatever sub-agency, jump in, because this is more your world than mine, sub-agency that it sort of lives with. So if it's Board of Health, it's Board of Health. If it's DPW, it's DPW. If it's...
Maybe you want to bounce that off the legal department.
Somebody else, she'll definitely get a bite at that apple and stuff. That's one of the reasons, that's one of the reasons these are not written as orders or in any way, shape, or form formally. They're meant to be just talking points, because I don't know how to bring them to you and then how to get them out of you as a regulation or whatever it's going to be, or town charter change or whatever.
No, I was just wanted to clarify something at the risk of opening things up again. We won't do that. But something you said, Z, and it's relative to this last bullet on the phase 3. I think I heard you say in lieu of sewer. IA all these properties, and I'm hearing you say in addition to sewer. And those are two very different things, so you should all think about that.
That's right. So I would also say, in the risk of talking my own book, we're only talking about alternative septic here. I think that the restoration, for lack of a better word, of the Marston's Mills River system is even lower hanging fruit, potentially with a much more rapid payback at a far lower cost. So I don't want to miss that. To me, that's Mill Pond and the Cranberry Box, and who knows what else.
And Lawrence.
But I think that really is something needs to be brought forward. Like to me, one of the headlines of the group should be, we need to continue to pursue alternative technologies, whatever they may be, because there's going to be new ones too. I sent an article to Butch where I'm about to on a really interesting new technology which is using a version of hydrogen peroxide. It's an Israeli company. I don't know if you read this or not. It was in the paper this weekend. And it talked about this technology which allows you to sequester carbon because it kills the harmful algal bloom And instead of, this is getting a little technical, but instead of exploding and that releases the carbon back in the atmosphere, in this case, the cells implode, sink to the bottom, but it controls the algal bloom and also sequesters carbon at the same time. The point is, there's interesting technologies out there that are coming that we need to make sure as a town, I think we continue to look at. Because we have these problems and the problems are gonna get worse no matter what we're doing, right? I mean, that's, to me, the bottom line. Climate change is happening and that's gonna mean we're gonna have more problems in our ponds and estuaries.
Yeah, my only response to your question is, I assume that it was both, meaning do this, phase 3, but the sewer's still part of the plan. But if we go down the road 10, 15, 20 years, maybe one of two things might happen. Either these IAs don't work as well as we thought they would, they're too expensive, we definitely want a sewer. And we got that in place, that's good. Or we find out, wow, these things work better than we thought we did, and they're cheaper, and maybe we save the town a bunch of money, maybe. I don't think we know the answer to that, but this, I think what's being suggested here provides a really nice time frame to A, start solving a problem, and B, keep our options open. That's my thought.
Does the sewer, the yellow phase 3, does that,
Yeah.
that whole
Yeah.
Watershed needs 100% taken out?
Yeah.
So there's aspects,
In order to achieve the plan.
there's aspects of that the modeling shows that.
Yeah.
So what the argument would be is that the combination of all the different alternatives we've talked about here,
Yeah.
not just the IAs,
Yeah,
but
the-
IAs do some, the bogs, the river, because I agree with Z, that is low hanging fruit. And that's why we're pursuing a lot of that stuff. And it's Lagrangian, it happens, I mean, it's what, hours to get from the top of the system to the bottom. You talk about, there's like effectively no travel time. That the combination of all those will make an impact. What that magnitude of impact is, I don't know. So you might not be able to get rid of everything, but you might be able to get rid of aspects of it. But the way the CWP has always been, the way it was written and the way it's been talked about is that all these alternatives are gonna be measured, and we're not asking DEP to predict outcomes. We're gonna say, this is what we're actually seeing in the environment. The other side of that, though, that might go against us is the argument that most of these samples were taken when, and there's still a whole lot of nitrogen from new development that happened that's making its way down the watershed that may not have been present at the time. And maybe at this point, MEP is undershooting, we don't know. So that's why I've always run back to, I like the plan, it's an and conversation, we can keep this plan because that satisfies the regulators right now, and we can do what we need to do. We can do all this other stuff, we can then measure it, and we'll know exactly what's happening. And if it's going great and to our benefit, we can have that conversation. If it's, oh my goodness, we actually need to do more than what we've initially planned, then we're gonna have to figure that piece out too. Does that make sense?
So to me, it's in lieu of if it works.
Right.
It's that simple, like, we're gonna have time to measure that.
All right, so we have 3 more items on the agenda, which could go really quickly, if everybody cooperates. The first one is public comments. I don't think we have any public here, correct? The second one is matters not reasonably anticipated by the chair, and of course, we all know how we anticipate anything we have to talk about, so we don't need to deal with that. No, kidding. Any other?
What's that?
Yes, go ahead.
At some point, I want to talk about Bragg's Lane.
Okay.
The section on the north side.
Yep.
I think it's 65% of the nitrogen has to come out. It's very hilly, very spread apart houses. If we started putting in AIs now, we could cover it and never sewer it. That's I've been thinking about that for years.
You don't do the same thing.
What's that?
You don't do the same thing. Sewer takes out 100% of the nitrogen
We don't need to take out 100%.
of the house, yeah, but of the homes that we've identified, we do.
Right,
Yeah, so we would need to expand the area.
expand the area maybe, yeah.
And
It's just
so
something
we
to
could
think
run
about.
some math to see if that's possible.
Okay,
But that is basically identified as 65% of that area.
you took 100% of that,
Yeah, right.
I see.
So it would be a larger area that would have to be addressed, but potentially feasible.
The other thing too, and not that it's gonna be an issue in Bragg's Lane, is that if it says 65%, it's 65% of the existing nitrogen. It's 100% of anything new.
Yeah.
Any new building, any expansion, any of that other stuff would have to come out. So that's, you're gonna expand,
Size of that sub-watershed.
you know, you're gonna start to expand and expand.
Yeah, the watershed goes up to Huckins Neck though.
What's that?
The watershed goes up to Lake Woquacket.
I don't.
That sub-watershed, I don't believe does, but we can map that out and give you more information on it.
Okay, just
Yeah.
if you could think about it.
Because when we did the plan, we based it on what MEP said had to be removed there.
Yeah.
So if the number was 66%, I don't remember, but if it was 66%, that's what's reflected there, it's 66% of the nitrogen. So we would need to expand the area
Expand it,
to
yeah.
get to that.
And it's
Through
within
IS.
the sub-watershed to Millway,
To Millway, yeah. It's
not
just
necessarily
Barnstable
all
Harbor.
of
All the whole back,
Barnstable Harbor.
Yeah,
The
so there's
western part, yeah.
two sub-watersheds that have to be addressed in there.
Okay, thanks.
Any other matters not anticipated? How about a motion for adjournment?
You got it. I think they're already in it.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Good job, everybody.
Thank you, Chris.